Welcome to the GCN Coach's Corner. I'm Ollie, normally found on GCN, and I'm here this week because Mark and Heather are busy changing nappies. Congratulations to them. And James is busy doing everything else while they're changing nappies. But fear not, I am qualified to answer your questions, and as ever, you can submit your questions down below using the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible within the allotted time. So, first up this week is a question from Phil Dowson, who says, GTN Coaches Corner, any tips on improving my power output outside? On the trainer, I can nail efforts close to my threshold based on the trainer sessions, but when I go out on the road, I can't seem to maintain anything over about 75% of my FTP unless I'm on a climb. Right. There's a number of things here that could be the cause of this, and it's not an uncommon issue. What you tend to find, actually, is that most people, I would say, end up being able to produce more power outside and struggle to produce the power inside. Now, reasons for this. First up, it could just be a technical thing. So if you're using a different power meter, either one built into your indoor trainer and then using an actual power meter built onto your bike outdoors, they can read differently, and that can be the cause of this. So that's the first thing to address. Try and dual record while you're on your indoor trainer and see if the two power meters are matching up together or if they're different, and then you'll at least know if that's the reason for that. The other thing is that it is different riding indoors to outdoors, and you say that you're struggling to put the power out unless you're on a climb. Something that you can do is when people ride indoors, they often prop the front wheel up, which can actually mean that you're angling the bike up and orientating your pelvis and your other muscles in a way that they're getting used to putting out the power in that orientation as you sit on the saddle, and that's almost simulating a climb. And so when you're flatter, that can actually then, your muscles aren't trained in that way, it can make it a bit more difficult. So that's something else to potentially look at. And also, you're just more stable on indoor trainer. You're able to you don't have to hold yourself up, you're locked in position. And so that's another thing. You know, there's quite a lot of different things that you can look at here. You don't necessarily have to have as much core strength outdoors as what you do on the turbo, so maybe you can address that by doing some more core sessions. But the number one thing I would suggest is just check that the two power meters are reading the same, or if they're different. Do that first. The next question is from Diban Strass, and they say, fatigue resistance is a frequently heard endurance parameter. The definition is the ability to prevent loss of sustainable power. Can you advise me on how best to measure my progress for my training for my full Ironman distance? Is this possible for one part, and does it automatically apply for all parts? Not sure what you mean by one part. I'm assuming you mean the different disciplines of swim, bike, run. But yeah, I mean, pretty much all endurance training is going to, you know, irrespective of the zone that you're performing it in, is going to improve your fatigue resistance at doing that activity for that amount of time. So obviously focus on cycling. But if you ride 5-hour rides, you get better at riding 5-hour rides. If you keep doing it at the same intensity, you get more adept at doing that, and you're less tired afterwards. And so it's identifying your goal pace that you want to be able to do in your event, and then train specifically to be able to hold that power output for increasing amounts of time. But what you can do, and what we're seeing increasingly within cycling, and what coaches are doing, is actually looking to measure fatigue resistance by actually getting riders to do an effort, like a higher intensity effort at the start of a long training session, and then do a long sort of zone 2 session, and then repeat that high intensity effort towards the end of the session to see what the drop-off is, and measuring it in that way. So that's one way you could track your progress if you were looking to improve your fatigue resistance. Although that kind of thing is less applicable to a triathlete, because you shouldn't be doing high intensity in an Ironman type race. You should, if you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. But it still does give you an idea of your fatigue resistance. Now, next question is from Libby Tricey, who says, how do you choose a sustainable race pace? I always aim for faster than what I seem to be capable of, and that results in training being quite hard but okay on race day. I can't hold up the pace. I enjoy running longer races, 15k and upwards, and my last 10k pace was 5 minutes 15 seconds per kilometre. My goal is 5 minutes per kilometre. Good going. My marathon time was 4 hours 26. Goal, 4 hours. Now, I was on time until around 30 to 35k, and then I blew up as it was my first. Keep up the good work. Right, well, the fundamental best thing that I can advise with pacing, and this is the same whether it's sort of cycling, running, or whatever, is to try and do a negative split. Now, this isn't an art form, you really have to practice doing it, but that can be the goal of a training session. You can set yourself a training session, or it could just be when you go and do your local park run event. You can say, right, I'm not bothered about doing a PB this week, but what I am going to do is do a negative split. So you run the second half faster than you ran the first half, or if you're doing a time trial, you make sure you put out more power, if you have a power meter, in the second half, and you go a bit easy for the first few minutes and build into it. There are a number of reasons why negative splits are proven strategies to go faster in races, but one of them is something that people don't necessarily consider, which is that you're not just concerned about your lactate threshold when you're doing an effort, so your ability to clear lactate. You don't want to build up too much lactate at the first half and then have to clear it, but also your temperature threshold. When your body is doing hard work, close to its limit, you're producing a lot of heat and your body has to dissipate that heat. Now, what we find is that athletes have something known as a temperature threshold as well as a lactate threshold. When your body overheats, it then struggles to cool down, and your temperature does, your performance just does drop off a cliff, like it does when you go into the red because you've gone too hard aerobically. It's a bit like if you played like computer games back in the day, and you had like you're playing a driving game, and you have that like limited turbo boost thing, and if you overdo it, you then you kind of burn out a bit, and you then have a penalty of having to go a bit slower. It's a bit like that, but by going steadier to begin with, you're allowing your body temperature to rise more slowly and your lactate levels to rise more slowly, which allows you to then push on harder in the second half. And overall, what has been observed within the scientific literature is that when athletes perform a negative split, they complete running or cycling time trials quicker than they would do if they'd adopted a pacing strategy where they went out harder at the start. So what you find is you don't lose anything if you do a negative split, but you stand to gain more. But it's a psychological tricky thing to do. So the advice is, next time you do some kind of running race or bike race or whatever, try to go out slower at the start, build, and then go harder and do a negative split. And that will help teach you more about pacing. Time for the last question now. Well, actually, it's two questions from M. Newell Large. First question, if travelling to a very different time zone for a race, US West Coast to New Zealand, for example, is there an optimal time to arrive before the race to adjust to the new time zone? And is there a time frame to completely avoid? Right. The more time you can give yourself, the better. But obviously, we're all, limited by other things we have to do in our lives. A lot of us have jobs and family commitments and other things, so you can't necessarily arrive a week early to acclimatise and get used to that. I definitely would say if you're flying long haul, not the day before. It's always going to be advisable. And it also depends in which direction you're going. So, for example, when I've flown over to Asia or I've flown over to, in certain directions, so if I flow in that direction, then from the UK, I feel all right going. It's on the way back that it hits me, the jet lag. So if I fly to the States, I feel not great when I get there. They're going the opposite direction, but when I come back, I feel all right. So that's something to consider. But if you can get there a few days before, that's going to be beneficial to you. Just acclimatizing as well and getting a bit used to the temperature and the climactic conditions. Flying in Europe, even if you're going within a similar time zone, like an hour time zone difference, like we have in Europe, I would still say you know, at the very least, get there the day before the event. But if you can do a couple of days before, that's going to be much better. But yeah, do what you can. The next one is on our caffeine video that we released on GCN, which says, in that we advise that riders should be taking 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. What is the rate for consuming that caffeine? At 65 kilograms, should I aim to consume 195 to 390 milligrams of caffeine every hour before the swim, and then also on the bike and the run, just at the beginning of the race? Right. So that 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine, that is your dose. That's like not every hour. And so you can either choose to take that like an hour before your event, or you can use to take it at the back end of your event. But I would advise against taking more than that. Like that will really overload your system with caffeine. And for a race, under 4 hours, yeah, like take it before, or take it, as you get onto the run or something. But it is individual. I don't personally respond like positively to caffeine in an ergogenic way to boost my performance. I love drinking coffee. It's one of my favorite things in the world, and I drink it for that reason, but I don't use it for performance enhancing. I've tried it and it doesn't really have an impact on me in that way. The other thing to bear in mind is caffeine is also going to cause you to need the toilet, especially when you take it in huge quantities. So when you're taking that much, there's a good, like an hour before your race, there's a good chance you're going to need a wee in your race. Whereas if you backload it and take it towards the end of the race, you probably just need a wee when you're finished. So that's something to factor in. If it's in the swim, it's not the end of the world if, you get into the, like most triathletes seem to do, they start the swim and then the first thing they do when they get in the water is have a wee inside their wetsuit. But that is something to factor in. And also taking loads of caffeine does have that tendency to dehydrate you because it is a diuretic, which can have negative performance consequences as well. And people can have headaches from it. But yeah, just factor that in. And yeah, don't take too much caffeine, kids. It's important. Right, I hope you found this useful. And yeah, if you have, please give it a thumbs up. And I hope I've done an all right job standing in for the triathletes. And yeah, hopefully one of them is back next week. Love you, bye.